My name's Madelaine Drohan. I'm the face behind the anonymous articles that appear in the Economist about Canada. And I'm really pleased to be up here on stage today with John Manley, President of the Business Council of Canada. But before Mr. Manley went into the private sector, he had quite a long career, quite a successful career as a politician. And so it's good because we can get the insights from you from both sides of the divide here, the government and also the private sector on this question. It struck me in listening to some of the comments this morning, and I followed the blog yesterday, that when people are talking about innovation, everyone seems to be talking about something different. So just to start with the ground rules here, what are you thinking about how are you defining innovation?
So you're exactly right, and you've been talking to me about innovation since you were the Globe and Mail and I was the industry minister. And if I'd known what I was talking about then, we wouldn't still be wrestling with this problem. So I think we will. The clearest, simplest definition is this, that research is the process of turning money into ideas, and innovation is the process of turning ideas into money.
Okay. Everybody go along with that? Okay. Okay. Well, as you've just alluded to, we've both been around for a long time. And you have seen many innovation agendas come and go. They might not have always been called innovation agenda, but that was the purpose. Is there any reason to believe that this new and forthcoming innovation agenda is going to have any more impact, is going to improve Canada's performance in this area?
Well, first, it's been such a long time that early in the Chrétien government, we put a series of really booklets out. The Purple Book, which was done by Peter Nicholson, was about the fiscal challenges we were facing. I had the Orange Book. Okay. It was called Building a More Innovative Economy. That was 1994. Mm-hmm. So this has been a conversation that's been going on a long time. So I'd say two things. One is, I think in those years, and this continued, I think, into the Martin and Harper governments, one of the approaches we took was very much one of feeding the pipeline. We created the Foundation for Innovation. We created the Canada Research Chairs program. We boosted the funding for the granting councils. We put new funding in place for graduate scholarships. So very much it was if we stuff money in this end of the pipeline, we're going to bring innovation out the other end of the pipeline. It isn't a total failure. And I think one of the things that Canadians like to do is understate how well we do and how good we are at many things. I tend to think these glasses are half full. In fact, they're actually a little more than half full because they were just replenished. But the innovation glass in Canada is half full, and we do some things really well. Okay, but going on from that, well, no, I'm not asking for your prescription so much, but is there a difference in the dynamics right now? Is there a difference in where Canada is at that somehow a new innovation agenda is going to measurably change the country's prospects? Well, everything is on fast forward compared to where it was when I was the industry minister. Art Eggleton sort of really led into that with his description of some of the challenges that are facing the job market. But as we've seen technologies accelerate virtually exponentially over the last number of years, some of them he mentioned, robotics and artificial intelligence, virtual reality, augmented reality, sensors, connectedness. I mean, my gosh, this is all happening very, very quickly, and the requirements that we have as a society to adapt to those things are very different. overlay that with the fact that we have an aging population, and you've got a very different environment than we had 25 years ago. So yeah, I think the situation is changing, but it's also so dynamic that the opportunities are also very important to Canadians to understand and to begin to experience.
Okay. I read the speech that you gave a little while ago, a couple of months ago, I guess, in Waterloo, where you were talking about innovation. And you had mentioned in there Canada's slipping in the ranking for the reading, science, and math skills of 15-year-olds. And we'll get to that. But I was interested in your comment where you said we're reluctant to talk about that. And I was wondering, are there other things that we're also reluctant to talk about that actually have a big bearing on how we do with innovation?
You know, I single out the educational parts because there is, you know, is some objective testing that tells us how we're doing relative to others. But I think at the same time we have to face some realities in how how our whole training system in Canada works. We've been trying very hard in the Business Council with some of our members, and we have the large companies. Our members employ about 1.5 million Canadians. We've set an objective with our CEOs, with university and college presidents, to provide every Canadian post-secondary student with the opportunity of having some work-integrated learning experience. And I'd say that from the employer's side, it's not so much we want to do this because we want to show corporate social responsibility or something. They're seeing it as a fundamental way for them to feed their pipeline. I use that as an illustration, Madelaine, because I don't think that we have been able to be very innovative about our whole skills and training system. We follow the pattern of past generations. If you went, I mean, Emmy was up here from Xerox. If you went into Xerox facilities in 1990 and looked around and went to it today, it's a totally different environment. Well, if you went to my university in 1990 and went into it today, other than the fact there's, you know, people have laptops, it's pretty much the same. The structure's the same. The courses even have the same numbers. And, you know, people sit and a prof goes in broadcast mode and you write exams in April and out you come with a credential of some sort. We don't really talk about the fact that the whole world is changing around us, and we're adapting very painfully slowly to how we skill up for those challenges. And of course, you know, I think it's clear, you know, the model that we had where we got our credential and then we went into the work world, for my children, forget about it. They've got to constantly be thinking about what their next training challenge is going to be, how they're going to upgrade their skills or reskill because of the changing environment in which they work. These are not comfortable topics to talk about, and they can easily become very negative, but they are vitally important, I think.
Why do you think they're not comfortable topics to talk about? Why do we want to avoid them?
We don't know what the answers are,
Right.
and we don't have a normalized distribution of adaptability to new learning and skills development. Many of us may have had the wrong base training. Our PISA scores indicate that it's going to be pretty hard to take 24-year-olds and teach them how to do things where they require a good understanding of mathematics or science because we're lagging, not everybody, but on average, our scores show that we're falling behind. These are hard things to fix, and so not very comfortable to talk about them.
Okay. just mining that speech a little further, you said something about, you were talking about 3 critical areas for improving innovation, and you mentioned growth through collaborative partnerships. And I wanted to ask you about that because specifically about businesses collaborating. Now, I know there's an example, and you gave it in your speech, and I believe he addressed the conference yesterday, Dan Wicklum from COSIA. But when I went looking for, a couple of years ago, I was looking for examples of businesses collaborating in Canada because, in fact, as you noted, they do this abroad, in Germany, in Sweden, in Finland. They all seem, Australia, they all seem more eager to collaborate among themselves than we do. And I'm curious to know why that would be.
I think we've been, I think, as you say, it is happening, it has happened. COSIA is a really good example of it in the oil sands where, but, you know, their experience, if you talk to some of the founders of COSIA, was that they literally had to kick all the lawyers out of the room to do it. I'm a lawyer, so I would have been kicked out of the room. And you know, there are some challenges there in the way we've traditionally approached things, but I think there's still some very good examples of collaboration. We sometimes call them clusters. Mm-hmm. We clearly have, for example, an aerospace cluster in the area around Montreal. The companies there do collaborate, they cooperate, they contribute together to training and skills development, working with the universities. Some of their research comes out of universities, and I think we have the capacity. Well, the Waterloo-Toronto corridor is a big cluster, if you like. In the past, and to some degree it's still true, we have a telecommunications cluster here in the west end of Ottawa. There's a lot of collaboration going on among businesses and with the educational sector. So I think we can do it, and maybe we just need to recognize where it's happening, where it's already starting to happen organically, and see if we can't up that game a little bit, as the Germans have done with, for example, with their Fraunhofer institutes.
So you don't think there's anything in the Canadian culture that we're perhaps a bit more American and less collaborative that would prevent these types of collaborations increasing? Because we are pretty low on the international scale. We don't even measure business-to-business collaboration. Most of the OECD countries do. We're not even on the chart because we don't measure it, which makes me think we don't value it.
Well, if you don't measure it, of course, you never really know how you're doing. So maybe sometimes I wondered whether we don't measure things because we don't want to know. But right. you know, I think there's a case to be made for Canada's evolved in a somewhat different way. We've got let's remember that as I would like to say, that our family business is still the extraction of natural resources. We don't always like to admit that, but that's 30% of our GDP. That's how we pay the rent. It's not designing medical devices. We might aspire to that, but that's not where we earn our keep. And we've had 150 years of really building an amazingly prosperous and successful country because we've been given this incredible endowment of natural resources. Those are not, extraction of natural resources are not as conducive to the kinds of collaborative innovation clusters as we've seen in some European countries where they basically have to import all of their natural resources. So I think there is something to be said for the fact that Canada starts from a different place, but I think we're catching up pretty rapidly. And I think that the opportunities for doing more, as we've seen, I think the panel yesterday about artificial intelligence underscored the fact that we've got world-leading capabilities there. We've got one of the only companies in the world that seems able to do quantum computing. and is close to having a commercialized product on. So there's a whole series of areas where we can be pretty good, and I don't think that we sometimes make sure that we all know that.
Okay. I'm going to make this my last question for you, but it's a big one on the role of government, because a case can be made that really the role of government in innovation is to provide the foundation. So invest in the education, invest in infrastructure, invest in, what's the third one? Just to provide that foundation, and then step back and let the private sector and individuals take over the innovation. Why should government be involved in this sector at all, really?
Well, you point out a few things that are very hard to do without government involvement, and the other would be research.
That was it, basic research.
Yeah, and so, some of this is going to be done by the private sector, but some of it needs to be done in the public sector. In the case of research, through our universities. Our immigration system is very much a function of public policy. It feeds directly into this. Our taxation system can encourage entrepreneurship and investment, or it can discourage it. So if the government is complacent about it, then it will get suboptimal results. And I think those are all examples of why it's important for government to have an innovation policy. What government mustn't do is believe that it can do all of it. It requires, my simple equation for what it takes to have innovation: literacy plus numeracy plus creativity. Mm-hmm. Creativity includes entrepreneurship and the ability to invent, but you've got to have those three ingredients, and government does play a role in ensuring that people have at least some of those elements.
I can see it on the literacy and the numeracy, but where I don't generally look to government for creativity. What are you talking about there?
I'm not looking to it for creativity, and this is more on the things you have to avoid stifling. Certainly if you embody entrepreneurship in that creative element, many of your policies can impede it, and some could actually enhance it. So, I think the notion that the Morneau panel is working on around ensuring that there's funding for growth, to support the growth in companies, not just, we're actually pretty good at startups in Canada, according to the international stats. Mm-hmm. We're not very good at growing them. So there's a policy element to that. There could be a funding element to it. Entrepreneurship can be stifled by poor systems of intellectual property protection. It's an area of important public policy. So there's a lot of things that the governments need to understand and be able to do. They can't put all of the ingredients together themselves and make it all happen. They need people in the private sector that are able to do that. Okay.
Sadly, we've run out of time just when we're getting to the good stuff here, but thank you very much for taking the time to come today.
My pleasure. Thank you.